emerged out of the swamp, and there she was, New Marais. Came here 4 years ago while learning how to climb. These monsters are gonna get in my way. I say bring it.
What do you get when you put together a renowned rock drummer, classical musicians, a southern funk band, an award-winning composer, and Sony Computer Entertainment? An unprecedented musical collaboration for the soundtrack to inFamous 2. The sequel to 2009's inFamous has main man Cole wielding brand new powers in a new city, New Marais. To amp up the ambience, the entire production crew trekked from the Bay Area down to New Orleans and back again to score Cole's moody new playground. This is New Marais, a swampy, devastated city overrun by mutants. If it looks familiar, that's because it's based on New Orleans, a city with a history of music and destruction. For SCEA music manager Jonathan Mayer, the backdrop was pure inspiration.
You worked on the first inFamous game, so what are you doing different with this one?
In inFamous 1, so much of the score was trying to express the personality of this amazing city that Sucker Punch had built for the game. As soon as we started discussing the new city with them, and of course the concept that it was based on New Orleans said so much to us musically right away, that we knew we had an immediate sort of like game changer.
And a move away from Empire City's electronic-based rhythms. To nail a percussion-heavy backbone with a funky southern twist, Jonathan recruited rock drummer Brain Mantilla, who's played with everyone from Tom Waits to Guns N' Roses. New Orleans funk band Galactic were added to the mix for some local flavor.
Bringing in the guys from Galactic and Brain was all actually pretty easy because they're all collaborative artists by nature.
I listened to the old soundtrack, and you know, they said they wanted to get away from the electronic side and make it more organic.
You know, we've played a lot of video games over our lives, and knowing that the game is kind of based loosely in a fictitious New Orleans kind of environment, we kind of knew what they were looking for from us.
Bringing in the more classical elements are orchestrator Tim Davies and orchestral composer Jim Dooley. They both contributed to the first game's soundtrack. We caught up with them during a recording session at Skywalker Ranch.
Working on the second game presented its own new set of challenges aside from the first one. The first one, we wanted to do better than we did the first time.
But translating Cole's heroic sacrifice better isn't exactly a stroll through the radioactive park. Under Jonathan's guidance, the musicians were forced to stretch their creative comfort zones.
We started thinking, well, let's take real musical instruments and stuff like that and just make them sound weird and twisted and dark.
Well, what we did with this is we worked with a small string group, and you know, with 5 players and close miking, and you know, getting sort of really having them involved in the process, we were able to get lots of unique sounds out of classical instruments. So it was just violin, viola, cello, and bass, but we kind of made them sound in a way like, you know, distorted guitars.
These cues that Jonathan would give us, which were just that, like cues, that didn't have to be exactly this length, and there was a certain amount of freedom built in there for us to just try and develop the sound that he was describing.
In a funny way, it was kind of pick up like wrong notes and odd rhythms.
It's heroic, but it was very distressed, so that's why when I was making the percussion sounds, I was really trying to, you know, I detuned a lot of it. I never tuned up when I had somebody play a bass or anything, because that kind of dissonance is part of the game.
They were just forced to sort of do things kind of wrong.
We could build to that. That was hip.
What's the rhythm of the game?
The people in charge are digging the really brutal, and they kept using the word brutal. You know, I was like, brutal, like more brutal, big drum stuff. And I'm like, okay, cool, I can do that.
Like in Cole's first adventure, unconventional sounds required some unconventional techniques and instruments.
Stuff like frying pans and just, mixing bowls, those kinds of things sprinkled around this 9-bingy bass drum and different calfskin-headed drums that I've been collecting.
And then we would start, be hitting the strings with pencils.
Tim started getting really creative with the kinds of direction he would put on the charts for these guys to play.
Here we go.
He came up with a direction that would be over, certain parts that the guys were supposed to play would say FWI on the score over them. Nobody wanted to be the guy that was like, what does this mean? And then finally someone did, and Tim sort of looked at them like, you should know this, and went, it means f with it.
Pulling off a soundtrack with so many different musicians required some killer collaboration. The team would exchange bits and pieces of original music, building upon each other's work.
For all the history of great tunes and orchestrations, like how do we do this in a new way? You need a good team to trust so that you can fail and move on with great success.
The Sony guys would come down with string quartets that they had written or little pieces and say, okay, here's this. How about you do like a real brutal big drum thing to it? Okay, I'll do that. Okay, now how about you go and do like more of an ambient thing on the Jungle Bizarro kit.
Like all of a sudden I'd hear something Galactic did or Jim do, and I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of already did something like that. That's cool. We're all it just all kind of fit.
All of the elements that they brought to the table worked really well together and somehow complemented each other.
There was a lot of interplay, a lot of ideas being thrown around. And it was great that we had the time to experiment with that.
Good. Wow. Great.
It's like a game of telephone almost.
Telephone's a great analogy because the way that things get sort of twisted and manipulated in a game of telephone, we wanted that to happen. You take the thing that this guy did and do your thing with it.
How is songwriting for a video game different from just regular songwriting?
It's very different, actually, to write for the game than it is to write for your own project. And it's very liberating in a way that we came up with stuff that, just by experimenting, we came up with stuff that we may never have thought of, just because we had complete freedom.
It was very different than recording for the band.
That was cool.
For me, it was awesome because I got to experiment with, so many different rhythms, like some on-time ones.
With Sony, it's great. We get away with experimenting a lot, and they want that. And sometimes you miss, but you're not going to get in trouble for trying here, which is great.
As it went, because I was like, they were digging it, saying, hey, keep going, keep experimenting. They were like, no one says that these days, That's why it was so fun to do this.
Some games use techniques that make their soundtracks and music more seamless. They'll do it all in one key, all in one time signature.
Right.
You guys did not do that.
No. I actually cringe when I hear stories like that. How to make that work in the context of the game and how to get from the piece of music that plays before that to the piece of music that plays after that and all those things. That's just more work for us to do, but it's work we relish and work we enjoy, and it's work that needs to happen to really nail it.
And from the sounds of it, they did. Since these super musicians scored Cole's journey, we had to ask, what superpower would they want?
Flying.
It would have to be some sort of super sax playing ability.
Wow.
I would like to be able to read people's minds.
I'd like to have gills, like Waterworld.
I would like to be able to drink, as much beer as I could possibly humanly consume without being drunk.
I think probably like the cool geek answer for me would be telekinesis. I've always wanted to be telekinetic. Like I'll spend a few minutes every day at my desk just trying to move things with my mind.
Well, their telekinesis powers might need some work, but at least this set of talented musicians have one super skill down pat, creating a killer soundtrack for Cole's continuing saga.